that it wouldn't take long for the demonisation of Peter Dutton to begin. I note the ABC have argued that he faced no rivals on his way to becoming opposition leader, shorthand for saying, well, he beat no one. But in the days leading up to the party room vote, the ABC told us that Liberal MPs had voiced concern that Dutton would be hard to sell in places like Victoria, where Teal independents snapped up Kooyong and Goldstein, and that Peter Dutton had an image problem. Well, let's dismantle some of this prejudicial nonsense. There is no leader in recent times who has come to the position of political leadership, and let's take them all: Albanese, Morrison, Shorten, Turnbull, Gillard, even Tony Abbott, and yes, include John Howard and Bob Hawke. No person has come to a position of party leadership with greater experience and more credentials across an enormous government portfolio experience. Peter Dutton's been in the parliament for 21 years, has won the seat of Dixon, a notionally Labor seat, 8 elections in a row. I think the people know him. He's been the assistant treasurer to Peter Costello. He's held ministries in the Howard, Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison cabinets. He served on the National Security Committee. And as he said yesterday, and I quote, "I've served as our country's health minister and as our sports minister. I've been a defence minister, home affairs minister. I've been on the expenditure review committee. I've been part of the National Security Committee, and I've been part of the leadership of the party," unquote. I repeat, no one in Australia's recent political history has come to a leadership position better credentialed. Prime Minister Albanese talks about being brought up in housing commission accommodation. Well, Peter Dutton made the point yesterday. His parents worked hard for every dollar. He said they weren't financially well off. And he said yesterday, quote, "I started part-time work at a butcher shop after school until I started university. I saved and bought a house at 19 and built a business from nothing to ultimately employing 40 people," unquote. Well, one journalist brought up the criticism by the West Australian Premier Mark McGowan that Peter Dutton was, quote, "an extremist who isn't very smart," unquote. Mr Dutton offered an excellent response, quote, "All I would say to the Australian people is look at me and form your own judgment. Listen to what I'm saying and form your own judgment as opposed to listening to these politically motivated statements," unquote. In relation to not being very smart, Peter Dutton answered, quote, "I have a bachelor's degree in business and public administration. I was not a committed student at school. I was more interested in making money. I started a business from nothing, employing 40 staff. I've been on the front bench of the Liberal Party since 2004, having been identified by John Howard in my first term as capable of being appointed quickly to the ministry," unquote. Asked about how he plans to change the rigid perception some voters may have of him, he made the simple but fluent observation, and I quote, "I've been given tough jobs as a minister. It was difficult in Home Affairs, but I was ultimately able to cancel the visas of just over 6,000 criminals, people who'd committed sexual offences against women and children, committed murder, serious criminal acts, and to deport them from our country," unquote. He said, quote, "It's pretty hard to break into a smile when you're making those announcements," unquote. He was asked whether he regretted walking out on the apology to the stolen generations. And while he did say that it was a mistake, he nonetheless offered a splendidly coherent explanation. He said it was largely because of his own background and experience. And I quote him, "As a policeman, I worked in Townsville. I remember going to many domestic violence incidents, particularly involving Indigenous communities. And for me at the time, I believed that the apology should be given when the problems were resolved. And the problems," he said, "are not resolved." He went on, "There are little boys and girls in part of our country in 2022 that slept in a shipping container last night to get through the hours of darkness in Indigenous communities, and it's completely unacceptable," unquote. And he made this point, with which millions of Australians could identify, quote, "Going to a meeting here in Canberra and giving 10 acknowledgements to country, that's fine, and I don't say that in a disparaging way, but I want to know how it is we're going to support those kids. I want to know how it is we're going to get better health outcomes and lower mortality rates, more kids through university, just finishing primary school and secondary school to start with. That is the perspective I bring to it," unquote. This is outstanding stuff. The Liberal base will be cheering. It's what the new Senator Jacinta Price spoke to us about last week. The simple point is this: there's much more to this man than he's given credit for. He's got experience, conviction and decency, and an awful lot of success to support the opinions he offers as opposition leader.